let's begin. So this person is asking about how to shade it. Don't do this. Be good. Okay. Um, where is my hard brush? All right. So when you're talking about light coming in, this is sort of the basic portraiture lighting. It's a little bit onto the side. If it's a bit too high, then those shadows will stretch a little bit. So what you want to do is move it a bit to the side. But this specific one right here, this specific kind of lighting angle, what you always have to ask yourself is, where is the light coming from if you want to shade three-dimensionally? If you want to create 3D looking people, you want to think about where the light source is. It is impossible. Everyone here who's listening today, it is impossible to shade if you don't know where the light source is. You can't just go in there and start making gradients from one edge to another edge, hoping that it works good and looks good. That's impossible. That's not going to work. What you have to do is determine where the light source is, because everything is cubical. Everything is cubic. There is the X and Y axis, and then there is the Z axis, the actual three-dimension that separates us from pretty much everything else, the crazy dimension that all sciences hail from. And what you have to do is invent that, or add that dimension into your shading process. What you do is you think about which part of this object is the cube. Where is the cube in this object? Where are the edges, the essential edges that interrupt the light source movement? I've done so many videos on this. If you guys don't really know what I'm talking about, or everything seems a bit lost in translation, I explain it 101 times on my YouTube channel if you guys want to take a look at that. So if I were to think of this object as a cube, where would the edges be? So the edges, one of the main edges on the face, are near the skeleton, the forehead at the top. So I want you all to just brush your hands over your over your foreheads, like Hannibal, or like that one girl from Kill Bill, how she gets her head lopped off, just on that area, and then move it down as if you're trying to create, like a line over your forehead. And you see that sudden jagged movement down into your temples. That has to be shaded. That is it. That has to be exemplified in your shading if you're shading that part of the forehead. If any sudden edges, any sudden turns, any sudden angles, please don't hurt your eye or get stuck in the window. Instructions are not clear. The instructions are pretty clear. If you get your head stuck in a window, you were probably listening to something else. Or Anishi, yes, thank you. So that edge has to be visible in the way the light behaves with the form. That's all that I'm saying. Light behaves with edges. Light is revealed. Light's train is interrupted when there is a sudden edge that no longer creates a smooth surface area exposing the light source. So this is what happens with the forehead. That edge moves down, and then we get the forehead side just like that. So this shouldn't have just been around the eyebrow. You were shading symbolically. Please remember never to shade symbolically, meaning thinking about, whether or not it should end here, or what something you remember being shaded in a certain way, one anime show you watched like 100 years ago. That's stuff that comes out of memory, and memory isn't that dependable. Excuse me. So you have to look for references that you can depend on, and really think the only thing that you can really depend on is real life. And so what you have to do is build a knowledge, or build a visual library knowledge that sources out of real life. So one of the most essential shadows or lights of the light, the light spots on the head, I always talk about light spots, is the forehead area here. And specifically for this kind of forehead, which is very masculine, very jagged, very muscular, I guess you can call it. The edge starts, or the edge finishes off or tapers off. I'm going to throw this in solids. I'm not going to shade with gradients, or shading with soft brush or anything. I'm just going to throw solid chunks on. This would be the area here that ends right at the high point, or the arch of the eyebrow, and then everything moves down after that. The light of the eye socket does not travel all the way down there. It's a very specific shadow. And where it ends is as soon as the socket is finished, because if this was one level, if you got a piece of tape and you brushed it over your eye, the piece of tape would not touch your eye. It would touch your lashes, but it would not be wrapped around your eye. It would just go straight from your forehead. If you had a piece of spaghetti, all right, and you hung the piece of spaghetti off one of your hairs, because you can, and then you threw it down and it would just fall over. It wouldn't really touch your eye because this is a hollowed out area. That sort of is a small example of what you should be doing with that hollowed area. Basically, it's a cave. It's nothing that the light can touch. The light is that piece of spaghetti that travels, messy eater, of course, that travels across in lines and vectors, that moves straight. And if it moves straight, it can be interrupted. There are things that can interrupt its flow. But after that thing is ended, it will still continue. So what that means is that the same intensity, not the exact same intensity, it's a little bit less contrasted. Contrast increases the closer you get to the light. So if this is the exact color of the light source, here would be 100%, here would be 80% or 70%. So it would be this light source color right here. And the cheekbone just starts off as soon as the forehead is finished and moves over into, what does that even mean? The cheekbones start off where the light left off on the forehead. And what that means is that there will be a result, or the result of that will be a shadow in the socket, just like this. Limited to the socket cave. It is not going to extend all the way down beneath the cheek. Again, this is symbolic shading, stuff that you probably remember from other units or signifiers of age or masculinity or femininity on your face. Do not shade symbolically, just shade blindly, shade like you are just a computer that shades. Do not bring in any creativity or any excessive artifacts in there, because basically if you have the core shadows and the core lights, you have the main highlights, you have the appropriate amount of contrast, everything will make sense. Alright? So don't forget that. So the cheekbone is one of the high points. Another high point area that is exposed to the light directly is the upper lip area. So it would travel this way as well. Again, this is symbolic. What you're telling me here with this line is that there is an actual hole. If I got my finger and pushed my finger in, that looks super wrong, it would disappear into his little cheekbone cave. Okay, so what you have to do is show that it's not, I can see the chat moving. I can see the chat flooding now. Probably all have something to say about that. What you have to do is represent it as a shadow, and it cannot be a shadow that is equal in intensity as shadows caused by caves or direct dark spots. So what that means is if you are going to place a shadow here that symbolizes the inward sort of the bony face or the lack of fat in his face, it cannot be as dark as an eye socket shadow or a nose shadow. It cannot be that dark. Alright, so all I'm doing here is just thinking about it as a structure. So in my head I'm seeing red lines, and I'm seeing the shape really come through, and I'm just seeing a series of shapes. And if you've read any decent art book, what it's always been telling you is just break it down into the most basic shapes. Just thinking about cubes and structures like that. Okay, so seeing the cheekbone as part that faces this way and then connects, and you see all of these little pieces here all become one side. And if there was a laser sticking out of here, the laser would be a dot because it's facing towards us, but over here we would see the side of the laser because there are two completely different directions or lines of sight. If there was an eye here and an eye here, they would see two different vision or two different images. And that's the point. That's what I want you to remember. As long as you have that stamped in your head, you will think like you will paint three-dimensionally. You will think like a 3D modeler. That's what you have to do. If you ever have the time or the opportunity, please try to get into 3D modeling, even in the most basic sense, because you have to implement some level of the third dimension or imagination of the third dimension in your art and your shading. If you do not do that, you will always shade two-dimensionally. You will always draw two-dimensionally. You will always draw Egyptians or the Egyptian hieroglyphs from the side. Everything will always be two-dimensional. Another thing to look up that'll sort of help explain to you the whole perspective on thinking in a different dimension or thinking with an added dimension in your imagination is to look up Carl Sagan's Flatlanders. Please, please, please look it up. It's a bit long, I can't really show it to you now. He explains sort of what two dimensions mean and what three dimensions mean, what a third dimension person or an apple that went into the, it's a really awesome video. You guys should watch it. I'll link it in the YouTube description if I remember. If I don't, please comment and remind me. So all the shades that I've added here are a response to this cube. Alright, and this is the cube that I think about. This is the cube that has to be visible. And it's very, the face is such an organic thing and such a unique thing that no one face is the same. So every face has a different kind of cube. And the most important thing, if you are working with reference, is to find the cube. If you're working with any kind of face, male, female, if you're drawing anything, even a flower, you have to think about where the cube is in that flower, where the third dimension is interrupting the linear light flow that is revealing it. We would not be able to see anything if it wasn't for light. And if you don't understand the relationship of light on form, whether the form is dense or transparent, whether the form is colored, whether the form is textured or smooth, if the form is bulky or flat like silk versus a rock. If you don't start thinking about third dimension, you will never be able to read the subtle differences in those and actually create believable still lifes. Form is all about that. Form comes in great variety, and so you have to build an eye for that. If you don't think three-dimensionally, you will not be able to read your references. When I say read your references, I mean looking at the image and knowing exactly the step-by-step that you're going to have to go through in order to recreate this and reproduce it on a 2D surface. Remember, what we're always trying to do is create 3D objects and imitate. It's fictional. We're not really 3D modeling anything. What we are doing is faking or creating an artificial third dimension because of the way we shade. That makes it more difficult, of course, because we only have those 2 dimensions on the paper right now. This is only 2 dimensions. I can only go in 2 I cannot stick my brush inside and then recreate like I can with Maya. That's why it's called a 3D modeling program. You actually have the z-axis or the third dimension to work with and manipulate to shape a form. So please remember that, and that's sort of how you'll find your way and correct all of your mistakes and critique yourself if you think about the form, whether or not you guys have a critique or not, you will still be able to build an instinct or be able to read around your mistakes. Alright, so next up is this person. What you've done is, you're telling me with this high contrast is either her face is extremely wet or extremely oily. That's the only time we really see this level of contrast in a face. What you have to do is mattify it. It will still function properly. I'm sorry, Mano, if I'm ranting. That's sort of what happens when you sit in a lecture. Someone usually rants, and you usually sit down and listen. You might want to visit a lecture hall one day. All right, so what I would do is bring down, not directly, not right away. I wouldn't bring down all of it because we do need some level of highlights. The only thing is you push the contrast a little too high. So what I would do is bring down the highlights first, and then I can correct the shadows. Once I bring these down, things start to make start to be a little easier to look at. Not make sense just yet. So I'm bringing down the values there. And when I place the light now, before the light that you added flooded the entire image, when I place the light, I'm only going to place it in areas that need it. So the sides of the breasts. Okay, what happens with breasts is just shade 2 balls separately and then combine them against a wall. That's pretty much. I mean, I have a lot of advice about how to shade certain things, but that's sort of the quick way. All right, and then we've got the cleavage, and then we've got the high point on the other side. So you have to think about where the high points are. Mountains and valleys, that's pretty much all you have to do. Once I balance that out, I can go back to the face, and I look at the face. The chest area is too contrasted. I want the attention to go back to the face. So I brought down that contrast a couple steps. Everything that you do has to has to create a sense of importance for the face. Everything has to point to it. The earring here is a touch too detailed compared to the eyes. It's taking all the attention away because there's less focus required to see and read this artifact comparing it to this one. So we have to make sure the detail levels all complement and display the importance of the focal point, which in portraiture is a face. Alright, so what I'm doing now after I brought down that contrast is I have to balance the shadows as well. The hair is also needs to be brought down a touch. I need to zoom out. Sorry guys. I have been uploading in higher quality, but I'm sorry if it's still not good enough. My computer tends to go nuts and my internet goes nuts as well. So I brought down that contrast, and the last thing that needs to be brought down after we bring down the skin is the eye whites. The eye whites cannot be this bright. This is no man's land. No man's land means that it's such a big white that it floods away all the rest of the form, and it does not allow a gradual buildup of form. If you want to have a gradual buildup of form where we have beautiful balance between darks and shadows, and darks and midtones, and then midtones and highlights, and have the highlights mean something when you place them in, you have to make sure that the lights and the darks are not too intense and there isn't too much contrast. A lot of contrast floods form. Please write that back at me. Write it down and send it back to me. What did I just say? I'm not repeating it. What did I say? Too much contrast floods form. A lot of contrast. Yes. If there's too much contrast, then the form, which depends on the beautiful balance between grays and lights, light grays and darker grays, the form becomes a stamp. The form becomes a silhouette. Basically, what the example of high contrast situation in real life is if someone was standing in front of a car headlights. You don't really see the detail on their face, do you? Because you are standing directly in their shadow. You don't see any half of their light or all of their light. If you were sitting in the car, you would see them perfectly. Well, I'm starting to sound like some serial killer, like I have experience of dealing with people standing in front of a headlight. Oh my God. But what you want to do is you want to avoid that high contrast situation where you have too much light that the person becomes a stamp or a silhouette. So you have to bring down the contrast so that we are seeing a beautiful balance. What I'm doing now is I'm going to bring the shadows into the face. By blending around the cube. So I'm thinking about where the cube is. Please do not forget to shade the lower eyelid. You guys draw it in, but you don't appreciate it. You don't show it love. You guys need to show the lower eyelid some love. Skin is very moist around the eyes, so that's the only place you'll really afford yourself any high contrast. You will not be able to afford it anywhere else. If it's not oily, if it's not wet, if it's not metallic, if it's not a mirror, if it's not glass, it is not reflective. And it will be mattified. Leather, rocks, anything. Unless the rock is like super shiny. It's like a diamond. So what I'm placing here is some light over the eyebrow. What that will do is create the sense of the 3D object protruding, moving outward. I'm also going to jump into Liquify and balance the corners of the eye. What happens with 3/4 view is you guys forget about the symmetry line. There's a great deal of symmetry that's important when you're working with 3/4 view, and if you don't think about the way the head moves and tilts along with the proportion lines on the face. So the proportions lines mean the horizontal line, the vertical line that cuts across the face, and the horizontal lines on top. That little fence we all create to help balance the proportions. If those don't tilt with you in your 3/4 view, then the face proportions will suffer. So that horizontal line for the eyebrow was here, but your eyebrow was all the way up here. I had to move it down. Your lip corner was up here, and the horizontal line is a little bit lower, so I had to move it down. Do you see that? That's because you don't think about the movement of the proportion lines that guide the face around. Okay. Areas that are bony, such as the chin, get less of a blendable edge. But areas that are fatty, that might have tiny hairs on them, like the cheeks, get a more blendable edge with the background. And I'll take that into the critique of this as well. How to unify a character into the background. It's going to be a bitch trying to lasso this out. Okay, going to darken the inner part of the eyebrow. Eyebrows, the T-zone, the entire T-zone here is the most oily and most moist part of the face. Therefore, if you want to show a face that is living, of course, when you want to add moisture, you're showing that the face is alive. That's really what you're doing. You're creating a living face that feels alive. So what does moisture do to a face or a character, boys and girls? Brings it to... The T-zone is that area that plagues us all in our teenage years. It's above your eyebrows and down your face. It's very oily. You usually get pimples in those areas because it's always oily and the pores are always drowning. It's just how the face works. Some of it comes in from the scalp. That's why you should wash your face every day with soap. 3 times, probably 4. Just to make sure your pores are clean. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the nose. I'm going to push the nose corner up just a little bit because what I want to represent is the nose is tucking up into the face, just like this. I don't want to show that if I were to look at her from the front, the old nose, if we were to look at her from the front, would be very similar to a pig nose where the nostrils are facing up. What we want to do is show the nostrils are facing down. And the way to do that is to have a tilt going down, meaning the nostril is actually higher than the tip. Usually that's what it is. If you guys look at the side view of any face, usually the nostril is a little bit higher from the side. It's usually up here. It's not down here. If it was down here, then we would see a lot of the nostril holes. So what you want to do is tilt the nostril up so it points down. That's sort of the more elegant nose. Again, this is all about beauty and we're just drawing the most vain. We're basically agents of vanity. Make sure not to make the eye too light. It's always overdone. People always make it too white. Alright, and then after that, actually one more time into liquify. Shrink my brush. Thank you for the size of this image. It's very easy to work with. Alright, so another big thing about form is cast shadows. Her neck is a little bit thick. So what you want to do is just push this back. Unify it with her hair. She does have really good posture in this position, so what we want to do is... Let me see if I can, without ruining the earring. Just pushing in her shoulder. Yeah, I'm going to ruin the earring. So the neck would travel, whoopsie, the neck would travel this way. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to connect it with the rest of the neck and the side, the sort of edge of the head connected to the neck and connected to the shoulders. I'm also going to carry the shadow, the corner shadow, into the temple just a little bit and then bring in some of the hair shadow here. And after doing that, I can now unify the shadow. Nice job not with the neck. Very nice job not drawing an edge. Good job with that. Beautiful shading on the neck, actually. Pat on the back. Beautiful shading. But what we need to do, of course, is get rid of that neck tendon or that little neck nerve. You guys overdo that. You think it reads, it really doesn't. You're trying to add anatomy because what happens is, okay, I'm painting, and I reach the neck. Holy crap, this looks empty. I know there's anatomy in this area. What do? Let me just add a massive neck line. Yay, I have anatomy. Wrong. That's not what you do. what you do is you create that sort of shading. Again, think about it as a cube. What are the bones that are protruding underneath? What is their role? So all you really have to do sometimes is just look, everybody look. One line, one shade, and it reads. Did everybody see that? Did everybody see that? One shade of light for the collarbone. If the neck area seems a bit empty for you and you want to create a more believable portrait, sitting that has a bare neck, shade it in, throw in a base tone, one little shade, responding to the light source, of course. This isn't just a work for all kind of thing. One little shade for the collarbone that is closest to you, and one little shadow there. If you want to take it a little bit further, get a light, place it beside that shadow. All right? Tendons, yes. All right, so here's where the cast shadow is. In a 3D world, there's a lot of shadows jumping around, but there's really only two kinds of shades or shadows or things that happen when they're shadowed. There is the shadow of the actual object, so the shadow on the object. So think about the moon in an eclipse state. The moon has shadows on it. Those are the shadows that make the difference between a crescent moon or a nearly full moon. That's the shadow on the moon. The moon itself is casting a shadow on something. So in an eclipse, the reason why it's dark in the world is because that's the shadow of the moon on us. That's a cast shadow. So the shadows on the moon are contour shadows, and the shadows on other objects is the cast shadow. The actual location where the light no longer can touch, because the opaque, dense object is in the way of the light vectors. It cannot go past it. The light doesn't travel on its own. It needs something to project it. Once it's projected, it has no control. It's suspended. It can't just travel on its own unless there's something else to bounce it off. Alright, so where that is here, this would be the cast shadow. The neck, the head would be the moon, and the cast shadow would be on the neck. And then what we do again is bring in that same light on the collarbone and bring in that light only in the lightest part of the neck. Does everyone see how much that reads? Is everybody seeing this? Very, very little rendering, and that's the value of painting with a sense of importance to your brush. You don't just throw brush strokes everywhere, you throw them in the most strategic spots. And what that means is you have to know where the form is. You have to think about the cube. If you don't think about the cube, you're not going to know where these beautiful brush strokes, the simple brush strokes, can go. In 5 or 6 brush strokes, you should be able to create a perfect torso. In 5 or 6, that's all you really should need. If you want to ever be one of those artists that paint those really quick speed paintings that are all textured and nice and beautiful, you won't be able to unless you know where the form is, where the main units and signifiers of the form, where the main core shadows are and where the main lights are. Yes, strategies, exactly. The strategy, like you have to think about, okay, all I have are 5 brush strokes. I am limited here. I can only use 5 brush strokes. What are the best spots for me to throw this light and throw this shadow? And if you find them, you will, what are you guys saying? Strategies? Form strategies? Strategismos. Okay. So yeah, think about that, and you'll be able to create the form structure that reads without much effort. That's really the hand of the master right there. If you can do that, you can do a lot. So this collarbone here will be protruding, having a little bit of a jut. And then I'm going to bring some of that collarbone light and throw it onto the other collarbone. Not as light because this area is also in cast shadow. Alright, some cast shadow on the breast. The breast will be pushing the hair upward because it is a mountain peak. And the hair will rest atop. Oh, her boobie looks really big, so I'm just going to bring that down. Alright, as for the cleavage itself, let me throw in some hair that looks a bit bold. The hair also looks very flat. What you might want to do is break it up. It looks like it's all on one level. What you might want to do is break up the hair. I'll show you how to do that in a second, but actually I don't have time to fix the breast that much. Maybe just push this upward. Yeah, that's pretty much all I can do right now. And then for her little shoulder pad, shade off the edges and the fronts, and then leave the areas that are facing the light as the lightest areas. Just like that. That way you have more form. Before it looked very flat. Now as for the hair, what I recommend is, I've showed this many times, large to small brush strokes. What you want to do is introduce some texture for the hair. So throwing in those smaller brush strokes. After the large brush strokes will introduce some of the detail, but you really just want to bring in some texture. Don't just throw in one tiny little gradient in between the outlines. Again, it doesn't matter what kind of brush you use, it's the technique and the knowledge and the application of that knowledge. It's not the brushes, boys and girls. It is not. The brush will not do it for you. Just letting you know. And someone asked about the brush. I knew it. I knew it. Criminals. It's not the brushes, guys. I will show you where you can get some good brushes, though, Gilly, if you want me to show you some. I will show you some, okay, Gilly? You should really, all you really have to do is find some textured brushes or textured slanted brushes or oil paint brushes. Those are usually the titles they go under. DeviantArt, if you search on DeviantArt, you'll find some amazing brushes there. Okay, and so I showed you guys how to shade hair. She has blonde hair, so I can't go any darker. Hair shades on an angle. That much contrast. Hair can be really susceptible to high contrast because it's very oily and very, very rich with moisture. Especially if you want to draw healthy hair. If you want to draw unhealthy hair, be my guest, make it all mattified with zero highlight, zero pin light. But if you want to draw a healthy looking hair, you have to use Pantene. Does anybody even use Pantene anymore? It might be your internet, Stixie. Yeah. If there was lag, it would notify me. It says perfect streaming on my end. And I'm using Ethernet, so there should be no reason I have lag anymore. Kick Tom Warner's ass. Okay, so this part of the hair also has some shading to it. This part here, and it travels on a curve just like this. That's what hair does. That's how the hair do. Right, so now it has a little bit more texture to it. So let's look at the before and after. Actually, one more time, let me lower the contrast. Leaving it only bright in areas that need it, nowhere else. So since the light is coming from the side of her nose actually would be getting the light. Not the tip of her nose. Where's the tip of her nose facing? It's facing all the way to the other side, and the light is coming in from here. This is facing all the way over there, so that's not a parallel line. Parallel lines create highlights, and I've explained that in one of my videos. I'm going to get rid of that little highlight here. I'm going to bring that highlight in from the side. What happens is the whole side of the cheek gets lit, including the side of the nose. Just like that. And then we have the cast shadow, of course, of the nose falling down upon the other side. Lower lip is a little lighter. Actually, if she's got lipstick on, I'm not going to touch it, but at least get one of the shadows for the nostril. You need the dark spot for the nostril. It's losing form. We need the dark point that all the gray builds up into. Okie dokie. And then we've got the side of the Cupid's bow that faces the light and the side that faces the dark. And then low contrast that. And one more desaturate. I mean, decontrast. It's nice when you have a little bit of both worlds. Before, after. Before, one of my friends said to me, this amazing quote, I said it last time as well, he read it from an artist, having a bunch of highlights everywhere is like having a bunch of bird poop. It's an amazing saying, and it explains so much. You want a little bit of bird poop for seasoning, but that's, again, that part I added. You do not want to have a bunch of bird poop everywhere. And avoid that whole mess of high contrast. You don't really need much to express the form. You don't need all that white. It's okay, calm down. You can do a lot with lighter gray. And this works more for me. As for composition, this whole area here needs to be closed off. Just like this. If you want to add some effect now, that's where things get interesting. Bam, baby. Throw half her face in shadow. Oh, that looks nice. And then bring in some secondary light source from the side. On the sides of her hair. Just like this. It's moments like these and I just love art. Just on the sides of her hair that are getting illuminated. She does have blonde hair. Witchcraft. He sounded like a merchant bringing out the good stuff. That's what I was doing. I love Morticia Addams. I love her. Alright, so there's that. I'm just going to blend those out. It reminded me of Cusco. Oh yeah, boom baby. So there's that little bit of drama. And if you want to make your audience mostly men, oh, there's another little thing you can do. Bring in all the contrast in the world right over here. It's all about the boobs now. It's kind of like Sakimi-chan's paintings. Come one, come all. Alright, so that's it for this piece. I'm going to get rid of that. That's an option. Flatten and save. Alright, on to this one. What you're doing here is, for character art, you're not really working with a composition. So what you can do, you can afford to make the background a little bit lighter and bring in some more contrast. So the issue here is that the values are so similar to each other on the edges of these characters, the edges of the character, that it's really hard to lasso them out or whatever. You have to throw in a little bit lighter. And then after you throw the lighter, you have to expand the size of the canvas. Make it a little bit more space. This is a standing character, so we need some head space. Oh, fuck. Excuse me. I know I swear a lot, I'm sorry. Damn it! What's happening? Okay. Thank you. Alright, so what I have to say about this is a couple things. First thing is this leather piece here is the largest object in the whole, it's the largest single object, the little thigh areas in the whole image, and they are not detailed. They are not as detailed as the smallest object in the whole image, or the face is one of the smallest objects. So what you've done is you've detailed like a portrait, and then you've expanded it and don't really know what to do with the rest. Look at the detail level here and here. I know it's not done, but if you were painting this from the start as a standing character, right now all of this should be at the same level. Probably like level 5 detail, where level 10 is the sort of endpoint. So it shows me that you are a specialist with the portrait. But when it comes down to the rest of the face, I don't really know what to do. This becomes a matter of material, of resources, of referencing. You have to pick up a good reference for leather. What kind of what happens to clothes when they fold? You have to think about seams, stitching, units of design. So where are the pockets? All of that stuff will add more detail to this area here. It is the largest area in the entire image, and yet has the least amount of detail. That is a flaming gun. Also, if she's wearing leather, why is it loose? You want to make it fit to her body, so at this point you really can sort of just find the outline of her clothes. Just try to create it as a skin tight piece, and that way you'll get more intrigue and more detail and more attention drawn to that area. It's really just a messy area, and that's why you didn't know what to do, because at this point you have a lot of information in your brain and in your visual library for faces and what to do with faces, but almost close to none for resources, for material, for texture. So what you want to do is just, set up some good references before you start. Start with the full body first. Don't do the face first and over detail it, because then you're going to lose motivation. I promise you that. That always happens to me. The boots, look up a good boot. Good boot shape. That's not really a flattering boot shape. I'm not really sure what kind of boot to give her. I guess you can give her a cowboy boot. I'm not really sure. I'm not really designing the character for you. Also, shrink your brush. Go in, and even if it's barely visible, bring in some sort of detail like stitching and all of that, because once you zoom out, it will look as clustered in detail as, say, this, which is done very well, by the way, or her headpiece. The second thing that I have an issue with is the ponytail that's flying in the wind. When you're doing character stand-ups, and you want to make a character, just showcase the character for a 3D modeler or for some sort of game development or something like that, that's usually what they do. They ask for a character turnaround or a character, standing character design. There's no wind and there is no environment. There is zero environment. That's the point. That's the point of those character stand-ups, is there's zero environment involved in understanding this character and viewing it. It's just a fashion show. There is no wind current, and there is no atmospheric fade, and there is no climate humidity that affects color vibrance, and then there is no, there's none of that. The closest you get is probably secondary light source, and that's it. So you just want to throw that in there. And then finally, proportions. Her head is extremely small and her body is very big. So again, this goes back to your sort of lack of experience with the human body and figure drawing. You need to do some more figure drawing studies. Her head seems to fit a little bit better now with her proportions and her length. Doesn't matter if she's skinny, even if she could just be skinny and short. She doesn't have to be, basically comparing to where her head was, that must have been like 9.5 heads long where it's supposed to be 8 heads long. Look up a good reference for a standing character. So right now you've pretty much just eyeballed it. What you can do is do a little trick that they do where you have the head, you have the shoulders in place, and then, even if it's from a side view, and then what happens is they do this thing where the legs still point down. It seems like you're looking down at the legs. They do that on purpose. Like there's a fisheye lens or something taking a picture of them where we see the tops of their shoes instead of the sides of their shoes, which is what you're seeing here. This is the proportionate one. This is appropriate as well, but a little trick for character design so you can see the tops of the shoes and shade them or detail them a little bit more, so for the 3D modeler or whoever is going to take over the design. Right, so head space, space for the head, and then detail on the legs, and then finally, please bring in some contrast. It's extremely low contrast right now, so bring in the contrast according to where the folds are on her shirt. If they face up toward the light, some contrast on the high points of that little sweater. What's it called when you have that stitching that looks like a quilt? Quilted? Yeah, it looks quilted. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, quilted. And then I'm just going to bring in some highlights here. Deselect, and then just blur them in because I don't really have time to. And I'll erase away what I don't want. The quilted picker-upper. If you bring in contrast, contrast equals detail. So if you want to add more detail to a certain area, without even shrinking your brush, just adding the contrast will make it look like it has more detail. Remember, not even shrinking your brush. Beautiful face, by the way. Very well done. I'm going to zoom in. Bring in some more on just the light spots, again, just the areas that we need, just to separate her from the background. Just going to redarken her eyebrows. Okay, bring in some highlights on her hair. Oops. Just zoom out or else I'll overdo it. And of course you want to cast some shadows. Shadow under the breast area. And a shadow under every ripple of her sweater. And then some higher contrast. Leather is extremely high contrast. It's one of those things that looks like it's moist. You really should look up a good reference for the leather. Okay, just adding some more light. So I'm shading around the character very carefully. Delete those. And then what I'm going to do now is separate her from the background and create a halo of shadow around her, separating her from the background on all fronts. So it's like a border or a frame of shadow. Separates her from the background. That way she becomes her own sort of comes from her own shading, and the background again acts just as a unit of design or balance. I'm going to bring these shadows down a little bit to increase that contrast. And then finally, oopsie, one last little, actually auto contrast, no, that's too much. Just increasing. Damn it, I did it again. Contrast goes up. She's got a lot of black in her clothing, so that's going to be another reason why she's blended into the background a little bit too much. Brighten up the background one last little step, and that seems to be a good place for me at least, or my taste, for where she should be standing in the background. Her position is a little bit slanted. She seems like she's going to fall over. So I would tilt her forward so she looks like she's leaning on her legs. Okay. Flatten. So before, after. Higher contrast, less environment that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's the only thing that was flying out. Sometimes just don't make the hair move. I mean, sometimes you guys want to do that. If you really want to show the hair, just bring in some of her hair on top of her shirt. If not, then don't sacrifice, you know, just for hair, the whole physics of the image. Bring in some hair on her shirt, just like that if you want that hair texture over everything. Alright, get a good reference for the stance because it does look a little bit awkward. I would move her thigh, this leg over just a little bit. If I did that, I'd have to tilt her back. It's kind of a little bit of an awkward position. And then tilt her foot in. Is it even going to work? Trying to keep my eye on the navigator. Oh, whoops. Okay, so that seems to be a little bit more stable. And then I'll just tilt her back one last time. Sorry, guys. Okay. Seems to make a little bit more sense to me now. Her leg seems to have a purpose in her position, holding up her weight than just randomly sitting off in the back. So before, after. It's got more of a bend and a stability on the flat ground beneath it. More contrast. So the character separates from the background. Again, you want low contrast when you are rendering an object in an environment. So there's a room, and there's a shadow, and there's curtains, and there's minor little candles if it's a dark room. If you know this gray that you use for the background is pretty. It's one of those mid-tone dark grays. I usually choose a gray from up here. Choose a gray from down here if I want to make a point of being low contrast. So remember all of that. Beware of the dark background. Beware of using too much dark. If you're doing character lineups, you do not need any environment in the back. No one big square in the back behind her. Don't do that. Don't do the square, guys. Nobody do the square, please. You don't need this square. It's a design choice. Unless you really have to have it, you really don't need it. Probably like really, if you had to have it, really low contrast. That always looks the best. As for like, getting a textured brush, Just like in the background, just so that you can have something there interesting to look at. If it's don't do it if you don't have to do it. Don't do it if you're either your commissioner or the design for the sake of the character. If it makes no addition, if it plays no role in the form and function of the character, you do not need an interesting background. The grayer the background, the most boring the background, the more boring the background, the more interesting the character. Okay? Yes, squares and lens flares plus chromatic aberration overkill. Also the 3D little trick, one step to the left, one step to the right in green and red. As to how do you present the characters then? Just gray. That's it. That's all I do. All they want is the character. They're paying for the character design. They're not paying me to make a background. And if they don't need a background in order to make the character, then why the heck do I need a background? If they need a background, they're asking for a character in an environment. That's an environment scene. That's an illustration. That's a painting. That's a whole world you have to design. That's months and months of work or weeks and weeks of work. It's a character design. They just want something to give the 3D modeler so they can make something for their game. That's the purpose of a character design. You're just designing the costume and the face of the character. Adding ground is not necessary. Again, as long as you show the feet are stable on a ground, the ground does not need to be indicated. If you have to, if you must add a ground, you can do something like this. Right? That's pretty much it. And you don't even need it because I already knew she was standing on the ground. I don't need an indicator. Okay? You can throw in a shadow. You can throw in a cast shadow. Yeah, definitely. And just have it little bobble up right there. You can do that. Absolutely. Go right ahead. Knock yourself out. But just don't throw any squares or lens flares in there at all. Alright? Before, after, the head size. Please notice the head size. That's a very big problem with your figure drawing or knowledge of anatomy. Any knowledge of anatomy should be a red flag. Go straight into your studies. The second you notice you've got a problem with your anatomy, it means there's going to be problems everywhere else. Especially if you're a character design artist and you want to work for Riot Games or Bethesda or Blizzard one day. If you don't have a good control over the basic anatomy of characters, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time. Yeah. Before, after. She seems more... It's like, yeah, I'm badass. Okay? I think that's it for today. I won't be able to look at this. Until next, keep your studies, and I will see you on Thursday, right? Today is Tuesday. I will see you guys on Thursday. Stay connected. Bye-bye.